Thank you, Lisa, for reminding me. It's one of my great challenges that I'm still working on when I do classes that are supposed to be recorded, remembering to push the record button. All right, so welcome. And the message today is about parables of Jesus related to the keys to success, keys to success. The common idea of success in the 21st century Western world includes attaining fame, accumulating wealth, excelling others in various skills, and achieving high status position. Those are some of the main ideas we have about success. Sometimes we have what I would consider to be sort of higher ideas of success. The idea and the work of raising a loving family, of living a virtuous life, of contributing to the common good. So we have all these ideas of success today, but what did people in Jesus' time think of success? Do they think of it the same way we do? Is it the same concept? Do we even find them using the word success? Well, certainly in those times, there were individuals who did as individuals do today, individuals who pursued wealth and fame and position and excellence. There was also a great drive among many to conquer foreign lands. We still have that sort of drive today, I suppose. But it's important to remember that people who had these ideas in Jesus's time were really among the elite, those who were either born to a position or simply had some unusual talents, I suppose, or unusual drive. About 80 to 90% of the people who lived in Jesus's time were mainly trying to survive, raise their families. They did that by farming, by common labor, and sometimes by begging. So those other notions of success that we think of today really seemed out of reach in those times, except for a privileged few. Most of the people that Jesus spoke to were in that 80 to 90% who were just trying to survive. The notion of achieving success as we think of it probably wasn't really a part of their worldview. They lived from day to day trying to find work or doing the work that they had, simply trying to survive. Even though there were, of course, others, the smaller group, who had ambitions. I think, that's a distinction between our world and that world that Jesus lived in today. I think in the Western world, most people are somewhat infected, if I can use that word, infected with the drive for success, however they think of success. It's a bigger thing in our consciousness today. And if we think about Jesus, we recognize that he chose to live the life of a wandering teacher, unburdened by possessions. When he told his disciples to go out, he told them to go out with minimum possessions. So we must assume that's the way he chose to live. So we might look at that and say, well, he was kind of like a wandering homeless person. And there is that side of it. That's what it sort of looks like. But on the other hand, Jesus, we also know, had many supporters who gave him money. He actually had in his group a treasurer, and the treasurer distributed funds to the poor. Jesus was invited to many meals and many parties in people's homes. In fact, Jesus ate enough and drank enough to be accused by his adversaries of being a glutton and a wine imbiber, a big drinker and a big eater. So he was doing all right, we could say, in that respect. He was well fed, and we can also say he was a well-fed and wealthy philanthropist from the other side of the picture, the giving to the poor from the treasury that was going with them, that was held by the treasure among Jesus's disciples. So I suppose we could say Jesus was a wealthy philanthropist who chose to live a simple life, a kind of minimalist life. If we define success, and at least one meaning of success, as influence on world culture, Jesus was arguably the most successful person in history. So I think we can look to his teachings to say, ask the sort of question, what did he think about achievement? What did he think about success and how to achieve it? Did he think about that? Did he teach about that? Well, parables I'm going to share or remind you of, I guess I could say today, I think these probably are pretty well-known parables. These parables actually suggest that listeners can raise their aspirations and achieve higher goals. The principles suggested in the parables, as we'll see, can still be applied by us today. The first parable I want to talk about is parable of the talents. It's widely known as the parable of the talents. Matthew and Luke both had versions of this parable. They were considerably different versions, but the basic outline of the story is fundamentally the same. And the way Matthew told the story, the way Luke told the story, reflected their theological interpretation of Jesus. So biblical scholars looking at both of these both versions of this parable, using the various methods that they have applied, have identified what was probably the basic parable as Jesus told it. The version in Matthew being a little closer to the original version in this case than the version found in Luke. So the first thing we need to think about before we get into the story is what a talent is in the context of those stories, the parable of the talents. And the translation I'm going to be reading isn't going to actually use the word talent, but an actual amount, because that's what talent was. Talent was a weight measurement that was used especially for gold and silver coins. So a talent of gold coins would be worth more than a talent of silver coins ordinarily, but a talent was about 75 pounds. So one talent was about, 1 talent of silver was about 6,000 coins. When you read the story where it uses the word talent, it talks about 1 talent, 2 talents, and 5 talents. But it's talking, each one of those talents is 6,000 coins. Now, in the context of the times, though, that amount of silver coins, just 1 talent, would be about equivalent to 20 years of wages for a common laborer. So kind of we think in terms of minimum wage, if you will, or the average payment for a common worker. If we were to translate that into sort of modern terms, we might translate it in terms of what the average United States farm worker makes. According to recent statistics, the average US farm worker makes about $34,000 a year. So if we translate that, the talents into that, in modern terms, 1 talent would be roughly equivalent to $680,000, Canadian or American, right? $680,000, 1 talent. So 2 talents would be $1,350,000. 5 talents would be $3,400,000. So the point I'm trying to make about this parable is when Jesus talks about these different servants getting these talents, he's talking about huge sums of money. Right? So keeping that in mind, as I said, the translation that I'm using actually mentions the number of silver coins that they received in place of the word talent. Here's how the story goes. Jesus says, it's like a man going on a trip who called his slaves and turned his valuables over to them. Oh, I would interject at this point that the ancient idea of a slave, different than our notions of, pre-Civil War America. A slave was someone who was captured in war usually, but often had talents and abilities that were used by those who had captured them. And that in those days, people could also, if they started out as, captives and slaves, they could, if they did well enough, they could purchase their freedom. Okay, so I'll back up again. He turns his valuables over to the slaves. To the first, he gave 30,000 silver coins. To the second, 12,000. To the third, 6,000. To each in relation to his ability. And he left. Immediately, the one who had received 30,000 silver coins went out and put the money to work. He doubled his investment. The second also doubled his money. The third, who had received the smallest amount, went out, dug a hole, and hid his master's silver. After a long absence, the slave's master returned to settle accounts with them. The first, who had received 30,000 silver coins, came and produced an additional 30,000 with this report. Master, you handed me 30,000 silver coins. As you can see, I have made you another 30,000. His master commended him. Well done, you competent and reliable slave. You have been trustworthy in small amounts. I will put you in charge of large amounts. One with 12,000 silver coins also came and reported, Master, you handed me 12,000 silver coins. As you can see, I have made another 12,000. His master commended him. Well done, you competent and reliable slave. You have been trustworthy in small amounts. I will put you in charge of large amounts. One who had received 6,000 silver coins also came and reported, Master, I know that you drive a hard bargain, reaping where you didn't sow and gathering where you didn't scatter. Since I was afraid, I went out and buried your money in the ground. Look, here it is. But his master replied to him, you incompetent and timid slave. So you knew that I reaped where I didn't scatter, did you? And you should have taken my money to the bankers. Then when I returned, I would have received my capital with interest. So take the money away from this fellow and give it to him, the one who has the greatest sum. And that's the way the story ends. Kind of maybe a surprising ending, maybe a shocking ending, where he takes the money away from the one servant to give it to the one who had made the most money previously. Now, when we think about this in the context again of Jesus's audience, that is those sums of money were larger amounts than most of them had ever seen or could imagine. The idea of entrusting so much money to slaves may have seemed a bit ridiculous to the audience, sort of outside their worldview. It was an exaggerated sum. And surely the idea of burying the equivalent of over $500,000 in a hole, I'm sorry. Okay, what's happening?